Welcome to the Radiantpreneur Rising Show with me, Jess Tomlinson. Interviews to inspire a new movement of leaders and entrepreneurs. The ones who lead with vulnerability and authenticity, stand in visibility, allowing themselves to truly be seen, are fierce and playful and sexy. Choose business as a spiritual practice. Seek collaboration versus competition. No, giving back is not an option. It's a necessity. They do it their way. They radiate. They rise. Now, let's rise together. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jess Tomlinson, and this is the Radiantpreneur Rising Show. And today I am so excited to be interviewing my guest, Diane Halfman, who is so amazing. She's going to blow your guys' mind. She's like the real life Wonder Woman. We actually connected at a higher level JV partner retreat back in December. It was December, right, Diane?
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. And she was just, you were so magnetic. I loved like how you just seemed to radiate and glow throughout the whole room. And then I was so delighted when we had the opportunity to connect, and she just interviewed me on her show. And now here we are.
So fun.
Welcome, Diane.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, Jess. It's so fun to connect with you, and I love what you're up to with your Radiantpreneurs.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I can't wait to dive into your spa life and what that stands for. I want to kick off our interview. Before I forget, I actually forgot like the last episode that I was filming. I got to the end and I'm like, wait a minute, I forgot the one question that I ask all of my guests. So I want to make sure that I get that in there, and then we'll just flow and see where the conversation takes us. But the question that I ask every guest is, how are you leaning into your visibility edges right now in your life and your business?
Oh, wow. I love that. I have dove into the deep end with visibility for myself lately. As I'm sure we're going to start talking a little bit more in our conversation is, I spent a lot of my life undercover because I was a police officer and worked, undercover as well as in patrol. And I didn't share that part of my life. Once I retired from the police department, I went on to be an entrepreneur, and I started helping people organize their life and started coaching and just really got into the entrepreneurial world and didn't really talk about my background at all. And so one of the things that was really I was called forward on in my masterminds was like, you have so much knowledge that you learned on having to make quick decisions every day and be in emergency situations, and really helping women not live from a place of emergency, and really all of the type of things from conflict resolution and just all of those type of things, where I am really kind of exposing myself in the background and being really visible with those life lessons. And especially one of the assignments I had was as an undercover prostitute. And I really didn't plan on sharing that with a lot of people because I felt like there may be some judgment, or, even though it was under the guise of my work, there's still a vulnerability of showing that kind of work and where things shifted in my life and what that looked like. And I really stepped more deeply into the visibility part because I really came to terms with how much that actually serves women who hide in many different ways. And the more we expose ourselves and the more we are being visible and, transparent, it allows other people to give themselves permission to do the same.
Yeah. Wow. I read that. When I was reading your bio before we got on, I knew that you were an undercover cop, but the fact that you had to go undercover as a prostitute, like, it just blew my mind. I immediately just, my perspective, I had so much respect for you, not only for sharing that, but also just to imagine, and I can't imagine, so I'm curious, what you have to share about this, but just to imagine how you were able to get into that state of mind, because this is a kind of like, I talk a lot about self-expression. That's really what I help women entrepreneurs do, is guide themselves home to their true authentic self. And the reality is we have so many different parts of ourselves that are hiding. And so I can imagine you had to access a part of yourself in that moment of being undercover and then even sharing what that was like. So tell us a little bit more about how you were able to access that part of yourself.
Well, it's interesting in that for as many resources that we like to think that we have outside of ourselves, there's certain times in our life where you really have to access that which is within. And
Mm,
I had technical training. I had some really great other female officers that really kind of showed me the ropes with that in terms of, what we were looking for, how to act, how to come into a certain role and be something different of that. And, one of the things I talk about is I was a single mom at the time. So I had two young daughters. So I literally had to shift from being a single mom to a uniformed police officer to a prostitute within a 24-hour period.
oh my
So
gosh.
putting on a whole different persona of who you are in many different ways. And I know so many women are like this, right? The different hats that we wear in our day, in our life can shift so
Mhm.
dramatically. And for me, being on the corner, there was such a, the vulnerability aspect is that a time where sure I'm fully trained, but I didn't have a gun on me. I didn't have a vest or a radio. I couldn't have any of those things on me. And especially, the way you dressed as a prostitute, you are literally naked in many ways, right? You're very exposed, in feeling safe and how you are reacting. And one of the things that really was a pivotal moment for myself is that standing there in the quiet of knowing that there was an arrest team nearby. However, knowing that things could happen in just a moment and that I
Mm,
really had to rely and dig deep on my own courage and my own confidence and really hold a way of being within myself that I felt safe, I felt protected, I could really stand in that power. And I believe that all women actually have this within themselves. Sometimes what happens is that, there's false feelings of fear, right? I mean, there's fear, but then there is how we react to the fear and how we respond and how we show up. And that energy allows us to stand more confidently in who we are in setting boundaries, in being clear in our communication. There's so many different things that we have control over that we sometimes don't think we do.
yeah. Yeah. Really like what I'm hearing you say, it's like you had to, and all of that vulnerability of standing on the corner and being naked in many ways, like tap into that trust within yourself.
Mhm.
So at the end of the day, it's like that's all we really have, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah. So how do you feel like you learned how to trust yourself more, if you did? Maybe I'm just assuming through that
Right.
experience.
I think that I've had many times where I've given my power away, and there's times where I've stood in it. And I think it's
Mhm.
important, a conversation for women to be okay with all of it, right? And that because there's learnings in times when we are giving that power away. And I think that there were nights I didn't feel as confident and it felt more scary, or, certain, people would stop to solicit and it didn't feel very safe. And so I had to dig deep within that to be like, okay, taking deep breaths, right? And remembering my training and knowing that I had options, that there were things that I could do to protect myself, to protect citizens, to really come from that place. And I think that so for me, part of what helped me keep my confidence was that I had two little girls I needed to get home to. Right. And
Mhm.
so it's kind of like that mama bear energy, if you will, where I had to like dig deep that for them, like I needed to get home for them.
Yeah.
And so I could stand more confidently knowing I had that bigger purpose. And I think that that translates into our businesses that we do as well. When we're doing something for a bigger purpose, then
Mhm.
we can work that extra time, or we can spend that extra, moments connecting because we know it's for something bigger. And one of the things that I also kind of learned in this too is that yes, we have this bigger giving that we have, but we also have to take that time to dig in and what's like kind of like what's in it for us. Like, why are we
Mhm.
here? And what's the purpose that we are having here? And there's been a lot of times where I've been visible, either, in my work, or just in life, but not really felt seen. Like people didn't really know who I am. And I can't really
Mhm.
reflect who I'm being if I don't take those moments to really check in with myself. And that's where that
Mhm.
inner wisdom happens, because there can be false visibility and there can be like, who are you are really being? And so it's a
Mm.
different way when we're relating, and we get to choose that of how much we're going to have ourselves be vulnerable and how much we're going to allow ourselves to be seen. And so I think, circling back to when I was on the corner and when I was doing that work, it became a choice to be that confident. And, being confident happens by actually just doing it, right? Courage happens by acting in courage. So we actually have to take a step in that direction. And it can be scary because if we've not stepped there before, there's not that safety net until we actually do it. And I mean, that's just our journey in life, is taking these steps, hoping that the ground is solid in front of us. And once we actually take that step and it feels solid, then we can kind of start building for the next step and then the next step. And just really, it is a trusting of ourselves to just actually take the step.
Yeah, I love that. That reminds me of Brene Brown. Are you familiar with her work?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, how she really talks about, vulnerability or courage is that act of vulnerability. It's an action, like getting in the ring, actually showing up and doing the thing that allows you to be seen, and that is a vulnerable step. So I love that you focused on like it's an action,
Yeah.
because it can be so easy to hide. And I'm really curious. There was so much good stuff in that share, but I'm curious about this false visibility. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that? I love that.
Yes, absolutely. So, I believe that everyone has a public life, that everyone gets to see who they are. Maybe it's at your work or your clients or those type of things. And we have a private life with our family and our friends. But I also believe that everyone has an undercover life. There's an aspect about ourself that we don't freely share. Sometimes it's maybe because something, happened in our life that we maybe feel shame around it, or we don't feel confident about it. Maybe we think we're going to be judged, or there's just something that just maybe feels like it doesn't add up to who we want to be in the world. And what happens with the falsity of that is that we are all of it. And even though we may have had an experience where, a lot of times I talk about a victim experience, like we've all had some sort of victim experience, and there's no comparison of how big or small that experience is. It's how we feel about that experience. And when we actually have those kind of victim experiences, it's how we interpret them, how we learn from them, what we do from that going forward is whether or not we're going to stay in victim energy, or we're just going to categorize it as a victim experience that we learned from. It was part of our journey, and we stand more in our power as part of it. So it's so important to be able to really look at how those things affect us. And we can show that public life and it can look like we're being visible, right? There could be someone
Mhm.
could be scanning by and looking at us chatting, and it looks like we're being visible. However, I could not have shared about my undercover work. I could not have shared about the vulnerability that I felt on the street, the scariness of being a single mom, knowing I had to make a mortgage payment, but I also needed to show up and be strong in the community as a police officer. And these different roles that we have, we don't always feel confident enough in ourselves to actually share those inner parts of who we are and who we're being. And we've all heard, with like the Marianne Williamson, about shining our light. And it really is the light aspect of ourself that sometimes scares us the most, that we're actually, it's not about just not sharing the things that are maybe negative or we don't feel like people serve us, but it's also the brilliance that we have within ourselves, right? That can also scare us, and we can not be visible in showing that because maybe we've heard in our life like, well, who are you to do that? Or the not good enough, and just the mindset type of things that can pop up on our journey. When
Mhm.
we acknowledge that that's just a normal part and it's how we react to those things, that's what makes the distinction. And as we have these kind of conversations and we share all of it, right? It's not just the good things or the things we hope we want to have people, believe about us, or, whatever those things are, that can be part of what makes us invisible in the world, because we are actually not energetically matching with people because they don't actually really know us. And
Mm,
that can be scary to show some of the real parts of who we are, because it's part of the human experience.
yeah. Yeah, I always say that, visibility is an action, like you're doing something to be visible sometimes, and sometimes it's an inaction. Like it's actually like the deepest core is how you feel. Like aligned visibility, I guess, is what
Yes.
I'm hearing you say. And that really comes back to only you can know if you are showing up in the way that is most aligned with your true self, right? That power within. So I'm curious if you'll talk a little bit more about what do you mean by power? Like what does that mean to you?
So for me, power is, I like to call power in terms of, like, I like feminine and fierce, right? I believe that we are all the spectrum of power. And sometimes people look at power as being like overpowering, right?
Mhm.
And that is one form of power, but standing in our sovereign power of who we are as women and the femininity of it, that can be a silent strength. That can be who you're showing up as. And so, in my business, this, Spa Life, the SPA stands for seek power always. So that power within you. And so for me, power is something that we have within ourselves, and by who we're being, that reflects into the world of standing in your knowingness, right? It's standing in your power is actually your brilliance, your gifts. It's everything you have to bring to the table that you are here and meant to share.
Yeah. And how do you think, like, what would be your biggest advice for people if they're like, I'm not really sure what to be sharing right now? One of the things that I really focus on supporting entrepreneurs in is that journey of like they've been in business for a while and they're now at this place where they're not really feeling aligned anymore, with either their entire business and they just want to blow it up or parts of their business that needs to align, but that can be a really like muddy place, right? So
Yes.
what would be your advice for how do you come back to, your gifts or that inner power and really know what you are meant to be doing right now in this season or this year or this time in your life?
Well, Jess, this is such a great question, and it's such an important question. And I think what happens is that it's not a one-time answer that we do. This is actually part of our journey to be able to
Totally.
continually ask this question of ourselves. And, a lot of times when we shift gears, it can sometimes feel like, well, I'm making a big shift and change, and things I did before, it was that a waste of time? Did that take me off path? Really questioning the shifts that we're making. And a lot of times we don't want to make a shift because we feel like, everything we've done up to this point will have been wasted time, or, especially, in a marketing way or in a business way, or how we relate to people. And one of the things that I love to share with, with my clients, and I have discussions with my friends around, is that it's all part of it. It's all relevant. None of it is
Yeah.
wasted. In fact, it's a great way to actually look at what are some of the through lines that happens. I mean, if anybody looked at the spectrum of my life, I can look at from, police officer to wife and mother to entrepreneur, where I help people organize their life, to now doing keynote speeches and, helping corporate women and, speaking about, the whole Me Too movement and stepping into the not me, where we're really looking at how women are showing up. In a lot of ways, it could look like those are not related. However, for me, there's always been that part of the power, the standing in that, whether it was power in your space, whether it was, being in service in the department. It was like there's a through line in who I was being that maybe didn't always seem, visible to myself. And the thing that I've really noticed in recent years that gets me back to, because I have those days where it's like, okay, what's happening next? Like what is the next level of that I'm to be going to and what I'm doing? And I find that the only thing that serves me in that is when I get quiet within myself. And whether that is prayer or meditation, or, I go through a process where I ask internal questions. And
Mhm.
I know one of the signs that I have found is that when I get myself, busy or overwhelmed, or I have a lot going on, I know that that's kind of a subconscious way that I'm not sitting quiet with myself to find out the next answer, because I
Mhm.
can actually hold myself back on some of those things because I'm not sitting to actually hear the next step. And there can be many reasons around that, but I think the main thing is that being afraid of that light, like, what more am I going to be asked to do? What am I going to be stepping into? And that can be a fearful space, and that could be not standing in my power of answering the call, right? And we have to be
Yeah.
quiet to answer that call. And knowing that no matter what that call is, even if it feels big, to know that we're going to be given the tools, we're going to be shown the way. It's going to be the next mentor that comes. It's going to be that next person that gives you the thing that you need to hear most. And so from having that not come from a place of fear, but coming from a place of embracing that light that we are and who we are here to be. And so really going within to grab that knowledge, to really be resident with whatever it is that we're being guided into.
Mm. Yes. Yeah. And that fits so well within your brand of the spa life. I mean, even just saying that, just really has me go inside and remembering that that's where it all starts, right? Is like clearing out that space to actually listen and then take the next step, and not coming from fear, but coming from that place of power and choice.
Yes.
And I really love this, and like I love that you can see all the ways that things are connected in your life. And it's so funny. This is so perfect. I love how this happens when I do these interviews. I was just on a mastermind call with some of my fellow Radiantpreneurs, and this was coming up. One of the women, she is talking a lot about something that is very personal to her lately, and bringing people together around this idea. And she's been sharing a lot around this message on social media, and feeling like she's not doing enough for her business. But we all reminded her that it's all the same.
Yeah.
It's all parts of you. And so I think that demonstrates really well what you are pointing to, that, all of these parts of our life are not separate, that there's these threads. And it had me remember that it took me this long. I've been in business for a decade to actually realize, oh, even though I've been a self-care coach helping corporate women, and even though I've been a relationship coach and a video coach, and now I help people more on a broader scale in their business, the thread for me has always been self-expression,
Yeah.
for myself. And that's my selfish why, I call it. Like you're talking about, like
Yeah.
really connecting to the why, like why are you doing it? If I don't feel fully self-expressed, I'm not happy. I don't feel lit up and creative and like I am being true to me. And that also comes down to, no matter what I'm teaching, to my clients, like self-expression is always that thread.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
so important. So I love this.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's so great is that it's in unexpected times that there are wisdom that we've gathered along the way, that it shows up in perfect ways that we maybe didn't even anticipate. I was actually on a podcast, last year, and somebody heard me on there from Sweden, and was in his meditation. And I don't work with that many men. I don't advertise that. But he, in his meditation, was called for me to be his spiritual guide. And I've done some of that work. I don't advertise it. I don't share it with people. It's like that person just comes to me when they know that they're that vibrational match for that. And so, we've been working together over this last year. In fact, he even flew into the United States for us to do some personal work together. And one of the things I find is there's things from all the different realms of my life that apply to him, things that have come up for him in business, things that have come up in his, in his personal life, and things about, being confident and making different decisions. And it's just so beautiful how people think they're coming to you for one particular thing that you're doing, but it's all of your experience. It's all of who you've done on your path, what makes you unique. We could
Yeah.
have 5 women on here that quote do the same thing, and we're all, empowering women, or self-expression, or standing and being fulfilled lives, or all those kind of things. But no one can replicate our path and our experiences and the way that we have done it. That's what makes all of us uniquely qualified to do what we're doing, because it all pops up at the right time, where you're like, wow, half the time I don't even know, like, where did that even come from, to share that with a client, because it was so ingrained in who I was being, that it came out at the perfect time. And that's what we're here to do, is just share our experience, and taking someone else one more step down the path for them to then stand in their brilliance, and giving them the permission to do it. I mean, all the work that we do, elevates us as well in the work. It's a collaborative process, which makes it so much more beautiful.
Yeah. Yes. Wow. That is so cool. How
Yeah.
neat that this guy found you and saw you as a spiritual mentor. Like,
Yeah.
and thank you for sharing that, because I feel like it gives everyone permission to remember, to trust the signs of like what is calling you forward. And oftentimes we don't even know what that looks like.
Right.
And what is the harm in following the breadcrumbs and the curiosity and just seeing what will happen. Like, I think it's important to always remind ourselves that even if we take one step forward, we can always choose to stop there,
Right.
if it doesn't work out for some reason. And it sounds like
Absolutely.
you're having an amazing time working with this
Yeah. I
guy.
mean, it was great. I mean, there was a part of me, and this is where, some of that, like, visibility and fraud, and like, I'm like, am I misrepresenting myself and saying that, I'm that person? And
Yeah.
I'm like, you know what? He obviously was called in some way. I'm here to serve in a way that I can't see yet.
Yeah.
And what was so beautiful about that is, every time before we have, our calls, I listen. Like, I listen to what it is that's to happen. And sometimes I don't even know till I actually pick up the phone and he starts speaking, that the message just comes. And that's part of that, channeling of our own wisdom, and the wisdom of that we have with the whole universe, that really, I believe that the universe conspires to help us, to really allows us to just be that conduit to deliver the next message. And I
Mhm.
mean, over and over again, I would get things from him where he would just be like, that's exactly what I needed to hear, and I didn't know exactly what I was going to be delivering till I was there, but I was present enough to hear his heart, to know where he was, and to be that messenger. And that's
Yeah.
really what we're here to do, is to be that messenger. And we do the back work. I mean, I have a master's, I've done training, I've done coaching, I've done those things to prepare ourselves for that, right?
Mhm.
But when we're in it, all of that dissolves away, and it becomes the fabric of who we are, that it gets delivered in the moment. That makes sense?
Mhm. Yeah, it totally makes sense. And I'm feeling called to share something that I did recently. Was I offered a intuitive business reading session. I was sitting listening to myself as we're talking about, and had been recently like looking over all of my like previous testimonials from business clients that I'd helped, and noticing that everyone, not everyone, but many of them had said like, Jess is so intuitive and I really appreciated her intuition. And I'm like, wait a minute here. Like, so I took the like first baby step and I started calling myself an intuitive business coach, and it felt really like good and aligned. And I'm like, yes, like I need to own this. This is part of my gift when I work with people. And then I also got the hit that I should offer this intuitive business reading. And I felt so good offering it. I sent out my email to my list and I made it a really like easy, lower investment, since it was all kind of an experiment. I was promoting it and got a lot of like great feedback from people saying, wow, this feels so good that you're offering this. But I didn't get anybody who said yes. Nobody paid. And what I learned from that was two things: that right now it's feeling really, really good for me to work with these higher level clients that I really just kind of give my all to. And so that kind of confirmed to me like, okay, we're still doing this, like this, the way that I'm working with people is on track. And what I also learned is, what, I'm not discounting that I'm not intuitive or that it was some big failure. Like, it was all this big experiment just to like put it out there and follow the signs. And it doesn't mean that it's a no forever. Like I might offer that again. I don't know, like if I get the inspiration. So
Right, right.
what is kind of, do you have any thoughts around that? Like this it's an experiment type
Yeah.
philosophy.
Well, I look at life's an experiment, right? And it's all about trying things out and trying them on. And I love that you're not judging yourself as it being, quote, a failure, because I look at it as a huge success. Because I think that some of those things are actually the universe testing us to see whether or not we're willing to take action based on an inspiration. And the fact that you just took that action, see, a lot of times we look at, paying it forward, right? Like we're doing something for someone else, we're not necessarily getting something in return from that person, but by us taking that action, we are having something else wonderful that's happening in our life that probably would not have happened if we didn't take that action, if we didn't take that movement to go forward on something. So anytime, we are listening to inspired action and accessing that intuition, we may not see the immediate results on that, but it will show up in beautiful other ways because you trust it.
Mm. Is everybody listening to what Diane just said? So important because we
Yes.
forget. We
Yes.
forget so many times that nothing is going to waste, and that inspired action alone. Oh, I love that, Diane.
Yes.
Beautiful. Preach on, sister.
Well, we all need to hear this. And it doesn't mean that I 100% stand in that all the time. I mean, I have my own self doubt, or, I'll be inspired to do something and I'll be like, what am I supposed to do with that? And it feels off track. And I sometimes will try and get the logic mind to try and figure all that part out. And I also have to just, stand in that with myself. And I still, struggle with that, getting that my butt in seat to be quiet enough to listen so that I can step into that next bigger version of why I'm here. And it sometimes still scares me because I sometimes feel like there's this part of me that, well, what if the message is too big for me to do what I'm here to do? Or, what if it's like I'm totally completely changing what I'm doing into something else, and that might feel scary. And, that is so far down the steps of just the listening part of it. That's where we get so far ahead of ourselves and we take ourselves out before we even get to experience what's possible and what's there in front of us. And so it's so important. I love that you are having these conversations because we do second guess ourselves and we do feel afraid. And it doesn't mean that we are fearful or we're in victim energy. It's just noticing. It's about being aware. And once we are aware of what's happening, then we have choices. And then we can decide to step into that courage. We can decide to just peek over the edge and see what's maybe there for us to look at. And it doesn't mean we have to step in that direction. We just have to be willing. And when we
Yeah.
are willing, that opens up the energy of so many other possibilities of why we are actually here. That's how we're able to stand in our power, is by trusting
Mm.
it.
Yeah. I want to highlight what you just said, that having awareness presents options
Yes.
and then you choose. Like I had this vision of you in the past you, as an undercover cop. Really, I can imagine you had to, like it was a matter of survival, fine tune your awareness so
Yes.
that you could quickly know your options and then be able to make a decision like at the drop
Right.
of a hat.
Absolutely. And I love that you picked that out because that is something that I find that a lot of women will struggle with, is that second guessing of themselves and making a quick decision. There's so many times there's that, like, paralysis of analysis kind of thing where it's like, oh, I don't want to make a bad decision, so I'm not going to make a decision. And then you're in the muck of that. It would be so much better to just make that decision, right? Weigh it out, but then make the decision, because when you make a decision, that's that stepping into, that's that intuitive action, that's moving forward, because just moving forward allows to just reveal to you what that next step is going to be. And in that forward motion, I mean, we've heard about, with I love the example of the GPS. Like if you just hold a GPS, device in your hand, it's not going to tell you anything. It only
Yeah.
works when you actually move forward. And
Yeah.
so that's what we have to do for ourselves, is just move. and then we will be guided and things will happen. So when we stay locked in to not making those motions, that's what keeps us locked down. That's where we start, second guessing ourselves and not allowing us to move forward. And I mean, this is one of the things that is really a focus for a lot of my corporate women and some of the entrepreneurs as well, is that because their decisions feel so big, that there'll be so much stress and anxiety around making those decisions that they'll almost sabotage other things to not have to make that decision. Or as soon as they make that decision, they'll second guess how they did, which then affects their team and affects how, the trust and what that all looks like. So we really do need to look at, and this is where our mentors can really support us, of being able to say, hey, this is where I'm at, holding you accountable to make a decision, right? The thing about making a decision, sometimes it feels permanent, like we can't erase those kind of things, but making those decisions then just allows us more decisions to make, and we then can make those shifts and changes that happen. But we really have to, dig deep into trusting ourselves that we're making the best decision with what we had in front of ourselves, and then we can shift. And that's one of the things that the most successful companies are able to do, is to make quick decisions. We can all think of companies that are no longer here because they weren't able to pivot in enough time with the changing shifts that are happening. So we have to be willing to step into action and to make those shifts and changes so we can continue to move forward.
Yeah, that's great. I was having a memory of when in my corporate career, I was in corporate marketing and I worked for very fast industries. I worked for the media, which is like super fast, publishing, like there's always something next. We're on deadline, we're on deadline. For magazines was my focus. And then my next industry was the airline industry, which is of course fast, right? There's always a deadline, you got to take off, and this is happening next. And um I like, it definitely required a certain type of person, which thank goodness I fit into, that is able to make quick decisions. And I think one thing that I've learned as an entrepreneur is that that definitely benefits me. And I've had to learn to slow down a little bit. It's like that polarity that we're talking about, right? It's like the getting quiet, the deeply listening, but then moving and not getting so in our heads when it's time to actually make a decision and move forward. So I just want to invite the audience to, really take note of where you're at on the spectrum of decision making.
Yes.
Because I think there's always kind of a dance that we can come back to, depending on where you're at.
Right. And I love the distinction that you made, because sometimes when we say like make a decision and, do it more quickly and making quicker decisions, it can feel like that can actually make people feel anxious and feel like it's ramping up where life is in fast forward. And that's not what we're saying here. It's like,
Right.
really what we want to be able to look at is sometimes we actually do need to slow down in order to, speed up, right? To slow down and listen within ourselves. And then once we get the message, then we can make the quick decision. And so it's really about not staying in that, fast forward mode all the time. And this is the thing that we really have to notice about ourselves. And I find this happens with a lot of people, where it's like you're totally on or you're completely off, right?
Extreme.
Hitting the gas or hitting the brake. Like there's no in between. And we really want to look at life as that dimmer switch, where we're making these adjustments that allow us to continue to get brighter and move forward and actually see the shifts and change that are happening. So I love that you make that distinction, because it really is important to slow down, to gather your thoughts, to be really, mindful about the way you're making those decisions. But then when you arrive at it, pull the trigger to actually make it happen. Right.
Yeah.
And that's really the dance between where you're slowing down and where you're living your life in that harmony, right? We're not going to ever have complete balance, but we can have harmony with the way that we're making our choices and the boundaries that we have, and really how we're deciding to live that. one of the things that I've recently did is that we've reclaimed in our household, we've reclaimed weekends. Like I started to
Mhm.
kind of seep in doing some work on weekends, and because we get so excited, and Carrie and I do some business together as well as having our own businesses, so it's like we've got three businesses that are happening under the household. And so
Wow.
yeah, and so a lot of times we did not have some clear boundaries of when do those businesses start and when do they end for the day. And so we got really clear on our hours of when we are open and closed, because as entrepreneurs we tend to think we're 24/7,
Mhm.
right? We're here to support whenever. And it's really important to have those boundaries, not only for your business, but also to really to emulate that for other people, to give them that permission. I mean, in other countries, they take months off. They take
Yes.
plenty of time and space, so they have a full experience of their life, that it's not just about our work life, it's about the totality of that. And that's part of where my spa life came in as well, was not only that seeking power within yourself, but choosing a life that you actually want to live, building a business that you actually want to be a part of. You don't want to build something that you then are tied to and that you hate. You really want to
Yeah.
have that time to shut it down, to be able to have those creative ideas, to restore yourself, to connect with people. Those are all part of that, and that's actually part of your business journey, is to have a life as part of it, right? And we sometimes forget that when we're in it. And there's going to be times, in launches and Facebook challenges and all those things, where it can get a little wonky, but we don't want that to be every day or every experience. We want to be able to really, bookend those things, to then have some, restoration time before we ramp up to the next thing, and to really look at the totality of what we're doing.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Diane is referencing, before we hit the record button, I was telling her I've been getting ready to do a Facebook Live challenge, which is starting, if you're watching this in real time, next week, which is April 15th. And the cool thing that I do want to share is that, I did work during the weekend, but I had long periods of rest. And then I had like my bursts of, writing the emails. And because of that, like kind of dance between rest and, quote unquote work, it felt so much more fun and so much easier. And I wasn't just like burning the candle and forcing myself to like, bust out the creative juice when there was none there. I shared on Instagram stories this past Friday. I took my partner to the airport. He's a retreat videographer and he's in Panama right now. And we had to wake up at 5 a.m., get him to the airport. I came back home and I was quote unquote supposed to do all my marketing materials by Friday, right? And I was like, this is just not happening. I had to give myself permission to just know that if I did nothing for the rest of the day and I just rested and went to bed early, I would wake up refreshed on Saturday and be able to get, things done so much more faster. And we
Absolutely.
forget that, right? Because we're in that state of like fear of like, oh my God, there's never enough time, like the time scarcity.
Right.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so important to really look at that. And I mean, really, sometimes the best thing you can do is go to bed.
totally. And it helped. And it helped. I woke up so refreshed and so excited. Whereas if I would have pushed through on that Friday, completely exhausted, probably would have sat at my computer, like blank screen syndrome, trying to write these emails, and nothing would have come to me. And I just would have gotten even more frustrated.
Right.
So
Right.
important reminder for all of
Yeah.
us. I love
Well,
what
and
you're
what's
saying,
great about, well, and what's great about being an entrepreneur is we get to choose what a weekend is, right? It
Diane.
doesn't have to
Yes.
be Saturday, Sunday. I mean, sometimes, that's going to be a Friday. It's going to be a Wednesday afternoon. I love where, you can have half days, and then you can decide like, okay, hey, I'm going to put this in, and then I'm going to do some outdoor activity or something else with that. But it's just important that you do fit it in, whatever that does look like, because it is when you step away from it that you get these great ideas, and you're coming to it with energy, and you're having things that are shifting and changing, that just allow you to do the bigger things that you're here to do. I mean, it's just so important to step into that, and for women in particularly to really claim their power, to stand in that, to, it's so important for me that, women are strong. I think they need to have some self-defense skills that they need to have, that they feel safe in the world, and that they are seen, that there is a visibility about who we are being and what that looks like. And so it's important to do that. And I'm so passionate about sharing those kind of skills with women so that they can restore themselves, that they can have all the tools that they need to be able to step in and do their bigger work in the world.
Mm, I love this, Diane. I'm curious with, really the state of women's empowerment rising to the Me Too movement, to Time's Up. Do you have any thoughts on how um, women in general, but women in business, like how do we have a responsibility for showing up in a certain way to really further the visibility of women?
Hmm. I love this question, for a lot of reasons. And it's one of the things I do in my workshops. In fact, I've got one coming up this next weekend where I teach women how to be their own cop. That's that confidence, optimism, and power, that COP, because we do need to have some of these skills that we maybe don't necessarily have. Maybe it wasn't part of how we were, grow up. And so it's important to have that personal responsibility of, that's the first step of getting our power back, is taking that personal responsibility of who we are, what our boundaries are, how we are showing up, and that we do not show up in that victim energy. I mean, as I mentioned, you can have a victim experience and it can be tragic. There can be a lot of things that's happened. I've taken many police reports of women who've been violated on many different levels. And one of the things that they felt the most shame and upset around was that they had, at some moment before something happened to them, they had a sense of, like, an inner knowing. Their intuition, their gut feeling had told them to, have a friend with them, turn down a different street, do something differently, and they ignored it. And this is not to make those women, wrong for it in any way. One of the things that is just an awareness to go, we do have these answers within ourselves, and not all things can be thwarted. If somebody is intent on causing you harm, that can happen. But what we do with that and who we show up with in that, and of course there's healing and there's a lot of things that come in that. And I'm not going to pretend that I know what every woman's experience is in that. But one of the things I do know is that the sooner we can reclaim our life and live it with purpose and passion, and redefining those boundaries of taking responsibility, that we actually have a choice, that it doesn't feel like someone else is doing it for us out there. When we feel like someone else is going to protect us or someone else is going to do something out there for us, then we're giving our power away. And so we want to be able to do all the things to fortify ourselves, to feel powerful, to feel strong, to really show up in a way that people, they really feel that you can, not from a a hard ass place where you're turning off all of your emotions, but from a confident feminine place, that it's a power that is very grounding power, right? And when you stand in that kind of power and you can look somebody in the eye and stand in that, they are not going to question who you are being. When you show up with that powerful queen energy, it's a
Mm-hmm.
force to be reckoned with. And it's when we second guess that, when we are doubting that, when we're allowing other people to make decisions for us for our own safety, then
Yeah.
it's part of giving that power away. And there's a lot of conversations that can have around that. And that's part of what I do in the workshops, to really allow women to bring voice to their concerns, and what are some of the things that they can do, and what do those things look like. It's definitely a much deeper conversation, but it does start with having personal responsibility of how we show up.
Yes. Yes, thanks for sharing that, Diane. And I think, I just want to give a real example that still kind of blows my mind. And I think this highlights a part of what you're talking about. So I'm curious your perspective. When I was in corporate, I would get, just kind of like random gross comments from certain men, and would just like brush them off, nothing too big. But what I noticed was those comments stopped. Actually, once I really started owning my sexiness, like just, and actually I started dressing sexier at work. So people like, I think as women, when we take this personal power back and just really, I'm not saying that if you do this that nothing bad will happen, but this is my experience and I feel like it's really potent. I don't want to demean, like, like water this down too much. So maybe you can help me out, Diane.
Yeah.
But when I started really just like walking around the office like, I'm a beautiful woman, I am so smart, I am not ashamed of who I am and how I look, like I didn't get those comments anymore. And it really like amazed me. And this is something that I used to talk about more when I was a relationship coach, because it really helped women shift the understanding of this, sexy archetype energy, which I know you and I talked about
Yeah.
on my interview with you. So do
Right.
you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think that more than how somebody appears, it's like your energy shows up before you do, right?
Yes.
And part of that sexiness, and I love how you mentioned that, because part of being feminine is being sexy. You don't want to shut that down, right? We know, and this is part of why it's good to have conversations, and it is a communication issue where women are having conversations with men. It's something that it's not, brushed under the rug. It's a conversation that's being said, right? And
Mhm.
sometimes, men or women will say things that they just don't think about how it lands and what it looks like. And, sometimes we say, well, they should know type thing. Why should they know? If this is what they heard growing up, or this was something that happened,
Mhm.
they may not have any frame of reference of what impact that had. And if they do, then it is part of our responsibility to say, hey, you know what? I'm not okay with that. Right.
Yeah.
I need to have a conversation, and not in a bitchy way, but in a really true, like, and maybe even out of a curiosity, like, I'm curious, what was your intention with that comment? Right? Because
Yes.
then it allows that person to have some awareness around what that is. I mean, look, I had plenty of complaints of other citizens saying that I was being sexually harassed on the police department as the only woman on my squad. I mean,
Mhm.
if I had to report those kind of things, it would be like I'd be in the office every day.
Yeah.
And it's not to say that they were right or wrong, but it was the interpretation of what other people heard, right? And I did never took it personally. Like, it's
Mhm.
not, and it's not a condoning. It's like when I stood in who I was being, it literally kind of goes back to that sticks and stones. Like, it didn't even penetrate who I was because of how I showed up.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so we can take that responsibility. And the ones that needed to have a conversation, I had those conversations. The one that was just like, I knew it was just an off comment. I mean, that's where the discernment comes in, where we're actually having these kind of conversations and being in the discussion around it and what it looks like. And I do think it's important to show up in as your sensual person, that you're
Mhm.
being who you are, because here's the thing: if women are feeling afraid and they are dressing down because of what they think they're preventing, they are still showing fear. They're
Yes.
still showing, they're not allowing their light to be seen. And
Yeah.
so when we shut down, there becomes an energy where we're actually emanating victim energy. And you will
Mhm.
actually have more things that'll happen because you are showing a victim energy, and victim energy attracts more and more victim energy. And
Yeah.
so when you stand in that confident, completely who you are, I mean, we also want to be responsible. We're not showing up to work in a slip, right? And
Right.
it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, let's be, real around this, but we want to be able to dress in things that are authentically who we are, and to
Mhm.
be able to do that and to be in the conversation around that, and to
Mhm.
really have enough of the conversations that everyone's being heard, everyone is being respected. But ultimately, we have to respect ourselves, and we have to take the responsibility of, we teach people how to treat us, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, I've had plenty of times where I didn't do a good job with that. I, was not treated really well in some relationships, and I allowed that. I had choices to not be in that relationship. I had choices to do something different, and
Mhm.
to, look outside of myself and my knowingness at the time. And those are all choices that we have to make. And there's so many different resources to be able to support women who feel like they don't know that next step, or they're not sure how to get some support in that. And I mean, I have had quite a few women who have come to me for some personal support in that because of their work environments, and
Mhm.
they know my path and the experiences I've had around that, and how I've overcome some of those things. And it's important just to have those tools in our toolbox, just like everything, just like, we're coming full circle here with all the things in our life experience. They
Mhm.
teach us to make different decisions, to take more responsibility for how we are operating in the world, and to really stand in that power. Because when you are doing that, people respect it. People show up in a way where they're like, you know what? That's not someone I'm going to be messing with, and
Yeah.
it's not because of I'm talking down or demeaning or commanding or being intimidating or being in that way. It is like, it's owning who you are. People don't mess with that.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Diane, for really driving that point home. What I heard is like, it's an energy. It's really being in alignment with yourself and your truest self and owning that, and also having the courage and self-respect to speak up if somebody is crossing that boundary. So thank you. So as we wrap up, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share to close this awesome conversation?
Well, thank you. Well, two things. One is, we've talked a bit about awareness, about having, awareness is such an important thing to see, like, what things are impacting us and what kind of shifts and changes we can make. And so I created my life reset quiz, and I would love that as a free gift to the listeners for them to do that. It takes 2 minutes. It's liferesetquiz.com, and it gives you awareness about what's happening in your personal space and in your mindset and your self-care. And it gives you indicators and allows you to know what's working in your life. Where are you knocking it out of the park? And where are things falling short? Where is it that you maybe need to have some more responsibility around? You maybe need to make some shifts and changes. And we can't make those shifts and changes in our life if we're not aware of them. And so when we know, then we have choice, and we can decide whether or not, you want some support of a mentor, or you are reevaluating how you're doing things. I mean, there's so many different things when we have the awareness of what's working and not working, to really be able to do that. So I'd love for anybody listening here to go to that liferesetquiz.com. And then my favorite quote that I love to end with is by Clement Watt, and it's, take the first step, no more, no less, and the next step will be revealed. So important to take that first step. We talked about action. We talked about how it's like intuition in motion is that action that we're moving forward so that we can then have the next step we revealed. Don't worry about that step 20 down the road, just the first step.
Awesome. I love that quote, Diane. Thank you so much. And for anybody who wants to connect more deeply with Diane or take her quiz, you can find it over in the show notes. This is episode 15 of the Radiantpreneur Rising Show. And that link is jessicatomlinson.com/show-15. See you guys soon.